Good evening, everyone. So, welcome to the fourth tutorial session of problem solving through programming in C. So, this is the SWAYAM course which has been floated by Professor Anupam Basu from Department of CSE, IIT Kharagpur, and I'm Siddhant, and I'm one of the three TAs who are in charge of taking these tutorial sessions, which will very briefly cover the week's concepts, the concepts that have been covered in that week, and solve a few tutorial questions which will help you out in solving the assignments and the final exam. So in this week we basically continued looking at the looping statements, for statement, and while and do while statements, and also the new thing we looked at is the flow control statements, which is break and continue. So keeping that in mind, we will start solving some questions regarding the same. Okay, so first we have a few questions on looping statements. If just to jog your memory, we talked about the for loop, the while loop, and the do while loop in the previous tutorial session.
Option A.
Okay.
First question will be option A.
Yeah, you can write the answer in the chat. Okay. And we discussed that the do while loop has to execute at least once. And we looked at the structures of the for loop, while loop, and do while loop. So let's see the first question. Okay. So what should be the answer to the first question? So we have a floating point variable which is k. We are setting it to 0, and then we are running a for loop which goes from 0.5 to less than 3 k plus plus, and we are printing the statement I love C. So what should be the answer for this case? I think some of you have already answered it as option A. Can any one of you unmute and tell me why option A should be the answer?
Because in the for loop syntax we have a missing semicolon. Initialization part.
Missing semicolon? Where?
We are missing semicolon in the for loop system.
Where exactly are we missing a semicolon?
No, sir.
So the for loop syntax is this, right? So say I is equal to 0, semicolon, I less than equal to n. So this is the conditional part, this is the initialization part, and this is the conditional part, and then we have the increment or decrement part, right? So everything is separated by semicolons. Now what about this case? So there is no missing semicolon as such here, but yeah, so we have a variable which is, we are initializing it to 0, but then we are again reinitializing it to 0.5, and we are the conditional for this for loop to stop is k should be will be equal to, or basically it won't be less than 3 anymore. In that case this for loop will stop, and the increment criteria is adding up with 1 at the end of the loop. Okay. Now in the first for the first iteration, For the first iteration, what will happen, you have a k value of 0.5, it will be printed once, okay, and then k value will increase by 1, it will become 1.5, still less than 3, it will be printed again, and then again the k value increases by 1, so k becomes 2.5, and it will print it again. Then k value becomes 3.5 and the loop stops, or the loop breaks, I would say. So we have this I love C, the statement, printed 3 times. So option D should be the answer.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, I previously asked and again asking, sir, how to watch the recording of this live session. Sir, I am not able to find it in the mobile phone.
So you can find the course page, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So okay, let me just send you the link to the channel. I think that will be much easier than saying it again and again. Okay, just wait a moment. So
Okay, sir.
you can see that I have posted a link in the chat. So this is the previous video's recording, and you can just go to that YouTube channel and you can follow the previous classes recordings. You will find all 3 of them there. Okay. Alright, so I hope everyone understands why this statement is printed 3 times here. So the first iteration, the second iteration, the third iteration, and then after the third iteration, the conditional is no more satisfied, that k value is no more less than 3, so the loop will stop executing. Okay, so it is printed a total of 3 times. Now let us see the second question. So we have a variable I which is set to 1, and we have a do while loop here, as you can see. And do while loop, we know that it will execute whatever is inside it at least once, because the condition checking occurs at the end of the loop. So keeping that in mind, let's see what the answer for this will be. Alright, so we know that while versus do while will be printed once, and then it will check the conditional, which is while I is equal to 1. Now you can see that I has the variable I has the value 1, and we are checking the conditional that I is equal to 1, which is true, but there is no increment or decrement that is happening. No increment or decrement of the iterator in this case, right? So there is no increment or decrement of iterator I. So this condition is always satisfied. The loop keeps executing again and again, because this I equal to 1 is always true. Here in this case it's always true, and because it's always true, the loop will keep executing infinitely. And what do I mean when I say the loop keeps executing infinitely? Whatever is inside the loop gets executed infinitely, and you will have while, and what it is doing is printing while versus do while. So you will have while versus do while getting printed infinite times. So is that clear why that happens? So we are not changing the value of the iterator I here anywhere, and our condition is in such a way that it is always true. So because it's always true, the loop will keep executing until the condition is true, and here the condition is always true, so it keeps executing infinitely, and it will keep printing while versus do while infinitely. Okay. Alright, so let's go to the next question. So okay, so let's look at this question. So we have initialized I as I, which is a integer variable, as 0, and we are writing a for loop with a conditional which is I less than equal to 9. So I should be less than equal to 9, that is the conditional, and we are doing the increment operation inside the loop and printing out something, the value of I. So what should be the answer here? Can you quickly solve this? So the for yeah,
Option A.
okay, now think about it properly and answer. Why option A? Like, try to solve a few iterations and check what should be the answer. So for example, here in initialization has been done before, you don't need to so it's not
Option C.
okay.
1 to 9.
Okay, 1 to 9 or 1 to 10?
1 to 9.
Okay, we'll see. Okay, so we have done the initialization. It's not necessary to do the initialization inside in the for loop statement. We can do the initialization previously also. So here that is what has been done. So so the minimum for loop, the most minimal for loop could be just written as this, right? And the rest everything could be done separately. So I could have the initialization done before, like here, and I could have the increment done inside the loop, which is here, and I could have kind of a conditional that I less than 10, then break. What exactly break means, we'll see that a bit later. So we could write the most simplistic for loop as just 2 semicolons. That would be normally just writing 2 semicolons would give us an infinite loop, but you can also do the initialization and the condition checking and the increment or decrement step inside the loop. All right, the initialization before the loop. Okay, so here we have done it in a similar manner, where the initialization we have done it before the loop, so we don't need to write it again as I equal to 0 in the for loop statement. What we have just written here is the condition, and the condition is I is less than equal to 9. And just notice this statement, which is a increment operation postfix, but doesn't matter because that is the only thing that we are doing in this statement. So we are doing a postfix operation here, and keep in mind that for loop always does the increment at the end of the loop. Normally, if you write if I had written I plus plus here, the increment occurs at the end of the loop, or rather at end of the iteration. Okay, but here, as you can see, the increment occurs at the beginning of the iteration. So the iteration starts, I is, for the first iteration I is still 0, but immediately I increment the value of I to 1. So the increment occurs at the start of the iteration. So that is the difference from a general for loop that has been according to this question. So the increment in a general for loop, if we write it in the for loop syntax inside the for loop statement, then the increment will occur at the end of the iteration, but here it is occurring at the beginning of the iteration. So by the time we print in the first iteration, we print I, the value is already 1. Okay, so 1 will be the first output from this printf statement. So what happens in the next statement? So after that, so the condition checking has also occurred initially. The condition checking occurs initially, the increment occurs at the end. So that is what we need to know about the for loop. In the for loop, the increment or decrement step occurs at the end in a general for loop, and the conditional checking takes place at the beginning. So so 1 has been printed, the value of I is 1, and then again it goes for the second iteration. Before the second iteration starts, it checks whether the value I is less than equal to 9, and yes, it is less than equal to 9 because the value is 1, so it's less than equal to 9. So again it increments the value, it prints 2, I becomes 2. So this continues, but till when? So let us consider a case where we had I is equal to 8, right? At some point I will become 8 at the end of the printf. So we will say we have printed till 8. Okay. Now for the next one we check I less than equal to 9, it is still true, and we increment the value of I to 9, we print 9. Okay, so I has become 9 now, and it goes back and check. So is I less than equal to 9? Yes, it is less than equal to 9, so it is still satisfied. So it increments the value of I to 10, and we get 10 printed here. So there is no comma as such, there is just a space. I am just writing the comma so that we can know what is exactly it's printing. So 10 will also be printed in that case, and after that the I value has, once it prints 10, it goes back again for the next iteration, but it checks the conditional, and I is no more less than equal to 9, so it is false, and the loop will stop executing. So here we will get a output of from 1 up till 10. Okay, is that clear, or are there any doubts? Clear? Okay, so let's look at the next question. So this is just the same question I've written. Okay, so let's look at the next question. We have a integer n, and we have a for loop where we have initialized n as 10, and the conditional checking says that n is less than 10, n minus minus, and it is printing something inside the loop. Okay, so what should be the output for this? So for this, let me just write down what it is. Kind of similar to the previous question that we saw.
No output.
Right, it should be no output, because for loop the thing to remember is the conditional is checked at beginning, of iteration for a general for loop. Okay, if we write it in the general syntax as in this case, so the conditional is checked at the beginning of the iteration, and the increment or decrement occurs at the end of the iteration. Okay, so these are the 2 points you need to remember about the for loop. So here we initialize the value of n to 10. So before the first iteration, it checks if n is less than 10, right? It checks if n is less than 10, and n is equal to 10. It's not less than 10. So it turns out to be false. So the loop won't execute. Okay, so the loop will not execute at all. So in that case there will be no output, because this printf statement is inside the loop, and because the loop will not execute, no output from this for loop. Okay, so is that clear to everyone? Yeah. Okay, so we'll go for the next question. So here we have two variables, k and j, and we are using the for loop for both of them. So this is also valid. Let me tell you that we can have multiple iterators at the same time, but they will iterate in a synchronous manner. That's what we have to remember. And we have initialized both k and j as 1 and 3 respectively, and we have conditionals for both of them, and also we have the increment or decrement statements for each of them, and we are printing inside the for loop we are printing the values of k and j. So what should be the output, do you think, in this case?
Option C.
Okay, yeah. So here the answer should be option C. This is correct. Um, why? Because this is basically kind of a logical AND, you could say. It works like a logical AND. Okay, now let me write down the iterations. Okay, so what happens in the first iteration. So in the first iteration, the value, remember that before the first iteration the value of k is 1, the value of j is 3 in the initialization step. So in the first iteration what happens is we print out the value of k and j. So we have 1 comma 3 getting printed, right? And at the end of the first iteration we have k plus plus, which means k becomes 2 and j becomes k and j minus minus, so j becomes 2, right? We go to the second iteration. It checks the condition for the second iteration. K is less than equal to 3 and j is also greater than equal to 1. So we have in the second iteration, the second iteration is executed and we have 2 comma 2 getting printed, right? So once 2 comma 2 is printed, the increment decrement occurs and the k value will become 3 due to the increment plus plus, and j value will become 1 due to the decrement minus minus. And we go to the third iteration. In the third iteration it checks if the conditions are still true. So k is less than equal to 3, yes. J is greater than equal to 1, yes. So both are still true, so it will go to the it will go and execute the third iteration. So in the third iteration you have 3 comma 1 getting printed, and after 3 comma 1 is printed you have the k value increasing by 1, so k becomes 4 and j becomes 0. Now when you go and you check for the fourth iteration, when you check before starting the fourth iteration, when you check the conditional, k is no more less than equal to 3 and j is no more greater than equal to 1, so it will be false. Both of them will be false. In that case the loop will not execute anymore after this. So your output will be 1 comma 3, 2 comma 2 and 3 comma 1. Now what would have happened if say one of my conditions, if instead of this I would have written k is less than equal to 3 comma j is greater than equal to 0. Alright, what would have happened in this case? What do you think? Anyone? So the same question, just that I would write in the conditional in a different way, that is k is less than equal to 3 comma j is greater than equal to 0. So after the third iteration the k value would be 4 and the j value is 0. So when it goes for the fourth iteration, before the fourth iteration, it would check the conditional, right? So it checks the conditional and it sees that k is not less than equal to 3, so that becomes false. And the other conditional is j is greater than equal to 0, but that is still valid, that is still true, but still it won't, the loop will not execute, because this writing the conditionals in this state, like the iterators in this state, basically is showing that you are using kind of a, it behaves like a logical AND operation, or rather basically similar to k less than equal to 3 and j is greater than equal to 1. So in this this case the conditional related to k will be false, so the logical AND value will be 0 for that is false, and the loop will not execute. So the output will still be the same. In this case it will still be 1 comma 3, 2 comma 2 and 3 comma 1. It won't print beyond that. Okay, alright, so I hope that is clear. So then we can move on to the next question. Okay, so next we go into what was a new concept that is covered this week. this flow control statements. So we looked at two different flow control statements. We looked at the break statement and we looked at the continue statement. So what the break statement does is it gets you out of the loop, right? So it breaks whatever is the nearest loop, out of the nearest loop rather I should say. So it will break you out of the nearest loop. And what does continue do is it will skip all subsequent statements in the loop and go to next iteration. Okay, so this is what the break and continue statement does. The break statement will terminate the loop at that very point, and the continue statement will skip all the subsequent statements for that particular iteration, and it will move the loop to the next iteration if there is a next iteration. Okay, so for the let's see the first question. So we have a for loop here defined in the most minimal way, and the initialization of the iterator is done prior, which is I equal to 0, and inside the for loop we have this statement which is I equals it's checking, the if condition is checking. Basically this is a minimal way to write the for loop, right? We need a conditional however, so that we know where the loop should stop. So here we write a if conditional, that is if I equals 10 then break. So it once I hits 10 it will break you out of the loop. Now what does the loop do? It prints the value of plus plus I. So it prints the value of plus plus I. Alright, so as you can see here, so it's a pre-increment operation. Okay, so it's a prefix increment operation. So the increment will occur first, and then that is what will go to the printf statement for the printing. The return value will be already modified value. So for the first iteration, what happens when we go to the first iteration? I is 0, but before printing I becomes 1, and that is what gets printed. So that should be 1 should be the first one, like the first output. Okay, then what happens in the second iteration? Before the printing occurs, I becomes 2. So this if condition is not satisfied, that is why I'm not paying it any attention, because I is not equal to 10 yet, so break will not be executed till then. And so before, in the second iteration, before printing, I's value increases by 1 and it becomes 2. That is what gets printed. Then we go to the third iteration. In the third iteration, we check the conditional, still not true. Before printing, I's value become 3, and so on. So this will continue till when, say I have printed till 9. So in the in one of the iterations, that is in the 8th iteration, we had the I value was 8 when we started the iteration, but just before printing the I's value became 9, and that is what got printed. So I have printed till 9. So I hope that is clear. What happens in the 9th iteration? So in the 9th iteration, so before the 9th iteration, the I value was, so the I value here was 9. It becomes it was 8 earlier, and now okay, just a moment. So okay, this is the 10th iteration, sorry. So this is the 10th iteration. So in the 10th iteration, what happens? I's value was 9 earlier and it becomes 10. But where does it become 10? It becomes 10 when it just before getting printed. So by that time this if conditional is checked and it was still false, because I was 9. So the conditional is still false, it just went to the next statement. So but before the printing, I's value became 10, right? So 10 got printed. but what happens in the next one? So when we go to the 11th iteration, the 11th iteration here starts, but it checks the conditional is I equal to 10, true, I is 10. So in that case it will break. So it will break you out of this for loop, that is this curly braces, which designates the block of statements in the for loop, and it will go to the next statement, which is return 0. Okay, so finally your output is from 1 to 10. So this is option C, that is your output.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, is this initialization correct for loop?
Yes, there is no issue with the initialization here.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Then how do we know that it's incrementing or decrementing?
Yeah, because we used a prefix increment operator here inside the printf inside the printf statement. So the loop with every iteration the I value increases by 1. Right? We are using a prefix increment here.
No, sir, in for loop.
Yeah, it does not need to be in the for loop. That's what I am saying, that this is a minimal for loop. Here basically I is our iterator here. Although there is no specified iterator for this for loop because this is just 2 semicolons, but here whatever work is happening with I. So we need a basically we need to initialize I to have a conditional with respect to I, and we need to have an increment or decrement on I. That is what this loop should be. Okay, because if you consider I as the iterator, those are the 3 operations that we need to do. We need to initialize I before or in the loop. I mean before we start the loop. We need a conditional which is related to I to check till when the loop should run, and then we need an increment operation or decrement operation on I, so that the loop at all changes and goes to the next value. Otherwise it just continues infinitely, right? So in this case that is what we are doing inside this printf statement, that we are doing a plus plus operation, that is a prefix increment operation on I, so that the iterator's value will change, so that the iterations will happen, but till a certain extent, till this certain conditional is fulfilled, or till this certain conditional is executed and broken out of, the iteration will happen. So the for loop has nothing to do with, so the increment and decrement, it is not related to the for loop actually. So this is still a for loop. I can write this, okay, and inside I can say print I. Okay, now this is a legitimate for loop. So in the first iteration it will print I, in the second iteration it will print I, in the third iteration it will print I, and so on. There is no we are not doing anything. This is an infinite loop. This will run infinitely. It will keep printing I infinitely. Okay, so so from this, what I wanted to tell you is the important thing in any loop is the iterator. So the iterator here is I. That is the one which gets initialized, which gets checked with the condition, and which increments or decrements. Depending on that, the loop will continue for some limited time, okay, or for some limited iterations. Now if you leave the loop as it is, it will run infinitely, but the iterator limits that limits the running of the loop. So here the iterator is I, and we are doing an increment operation in I, so that on fulfillment of some condition we can stop the loop. Okay, so the for loop as it is, if you write it like this, it will just run infinitely. So we need something to stop the for loop, right? So this is what we do. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, I'll just move to the next one. Okay, So in the next question we have again a do while loop, and it has both continue and break statements. So continue, if you remember, it skips all the subsequent statements in the loop and it goes to the next iteration. Okay, and we have a variable which is x set to the value of 1, and the do while loop we do an increment operation first on x. Yes.
So sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, can you please explain the execution of do while loop?
Okay, sure. So in a do while loop, let me write a very basic do while loop first. Right, this is your do while loop, right? So in do while loop, in the first iteration the statements will be executed, and after the iteration is over, after the statements are executed, once the iteration is complete, then the condition will be checked. If the condition is true, then again it goes back and the second iteration will start, and that will continue until the condition stays fulfilled. Okay, so this is similar to a while loop, just the issue is that the condition checking in a while loop occurs at the start. Like for example, in the for loop as well, the condition checking occurs in the beginning of the iteration. Before even the first iteration starts, there is a condition checking where if only the condition is true, the first iteration will start. Okay, otherwise the loop will just exit from there. In the while loop, the same, the condition checking occurs at the beginning of the while loop. If the condition is true, only then the first iteration will start executing, the statements inside the while loop will start executing. But in do while loop it's different, because the condition checking occurs at the end of the loop or at the end of the iteration. So everything, whatever statement you write inside the do while loop will be executed once, then the condition will be checked. If the condition is true, then good, we will go and execute the second iteration. If the condition is false, we'll exit. But even if we exit, know that the statements inside the do while loop have already been executed at least once. Okay, so is that clear how do while loop works? Is the working of the do while loop clear?
Yes, sir. Clear, sir.
Okay, so let's see. So what happens here is we increment the value of x. So for the one who was asking the previous question regarding the for loop, so here x is the iterator, as you can see. So we are doing operations on x. So we have initialized x, we are doing increment operation on x. Later we see that we are also checking the conditional with x. So x is the iterator here. Okay, and so what the first statement in the do while loop does, what it increments the value of x by 1. So in the first iteration, what happens in the first iteration? In the first iteration, n x becomes increments by 1 becomes 2, and then continue. Continue means the rest of the statements just it just ignores the rest of the statement and goes and checks the condition, because at the end of the first execution or the end of the first iteration, the condition is checked in the do while loop, right? So it checks the condition is x less than equal to 2, true, because x is 2, so that is true. Now so we go for the second iteration, because the condition is true, we go for the second iteration. So in the second iteration, what happens? The x value increases by 1 again, because that is the first statement. So the x value becomes 3 now, and again continue. So continue, so it ignores the rest of the statements after it. It goes and it checks the iteration is over. So at the end of the iteration, it checks the conditional. The conditional is x less than equal to 2, right? And now we find out that it's false. So once it becomes false, loop stops executing and it goes to the next statement. So the next statement says after it prints after loop x equal to what? So x is 3. So it just prints after loop x equal to 3. So here the answer is option D. It prints just that. Okay. Is it clear why the answer is option D here? Because the continue statement.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So everything is done due to this continue statement. Because all the statements after the continue statements will be just ignored, and it will go to the next iteration. But here, before the next iteration, the condition checking occurs. So that's what happens here. Yeah. So that is why this printf statement and this break statement are always ignored. So both of these are always ignored here because we have a continue statement before that. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the next question. So here let's look at the first question. We have a variable p, and that is our iterator, and it goes from it is initialized to 0, and the conditional is p less than 3, and we have p plus plus, which is the increment operation that is supposed to be done at the end of the loop.
Sir, option B.
Okay, option B. Yeah, that is correct. So right, it should be option B. So basically, how many times will this loop be executed? So the first time, let's see what happens in the first iteration. So p is 0 initially, and inside the loop, so this p has a scope of inside the for loop. Okay, so it has a scope which is limited to this curly brace, these two curly braces. Okay, so this p is different from the iterator p because you are redefining this, right? So this is an int that you are redefining inside the for loop. So it exists, this p only exists within the for loop. So the scope of this particular variable p is only within the for loop. Okay, and so you print that p. So inside you have to remember this. So whenever you do any operation on a variable and you have multiple variables of the same name, the operation is done on the variable in the innermost scope, or innermost as in the most local scope. Okay, so here this p, this int p equal to 4, that the statement that you have written, this p variable actually has the most local scope here, which is the highest priority scope inside this for loop compared to the other p that might have been defined before. It has the highest priority because it's defined in the most local manner, and that is what when you print the value of p, that is what gets printed. It refers to this local p which is local to the for loop. Okay, so that is why you get 4 printed once. Okay, and then p value, p meaning the iterator p, becomes plus plus. That means p becomes 1. It checks with the condition p less than 3 true. It goes and executes the second iteration, and second iteration it again redefines p as 4. This is another p, that is why I am writing int p, and it prints 4 again, right? And then p plus plus. So by the time this p plus plus occurs, this is no more, this p equals 4 variable is already destroyed. It's not there anymore because it does not have any significance while we are doing increment and decrement with, because that is outside, that is not part of the for loop block. It's a bit tricky, but try to understand this, that this block, whatever happens inside this block, and whatever happens in this statement, in this for statement, are kind of different. So this int p equals 4, this has scope only within the statements that is written in the for loop. So beyond that, it does not have, it does not carry any, like, it does not have any weightage, or it does not exist outside the variable p carrying a value of 4 does not doesn't exist outside the statements that have been written in the for loop in this case. So when I so after printing 4, when I do a p plus plus, it is actually done on p equals 1, and that value becomes 2, and we check that against the conditional, it is still true, and it goes for a third iteration. In the third iteration, again we define a variable p with 4 local variable, we get a print of 4, and then we do p plus plus again, so p value becomes from 2 to 3. Now we check with the conditional, this time it turns out to be false because p is not less than 3 anymore, it is equal to 3, so this is false, the loop breaks. Okay, so we have 3 times the value 4 will be printed. Yes, int in for loop used is valid in C. Yes, it is valid in C. This program itself, it's valid, there is no problem with this. So this interior p, which is inside the for loop, that has a scope of only inside the statements written in the for loop, and you have the variable p which is defined inside the int main, that has a scope of the int main, that is the function int main. Okay, so it's like kind of like this. So say this is the main function and this is the for loop. Okay, so we defined a variable p here and a variable p here. So the variable p that we define inside the for loop is valid only for the for loop. Okay, and outside that, the variable p that has been defined here, that is in the main function, is valid for that. So let me just write this as p star. So basically what I am trying to say is if you try to do some operation, if you have defined both the variables as p and you are trying to do some operation inside the for loop on p, it will do the operation on the local one, on the local variable which is defined inside the for loop, that is this p star here. Okay, and outside the for loop, the variable p will have the value of whatever this p has been defined inside int main, that is what the variable will be. But inside the for loop, the value will be regarding this, that is defined local to that. Okay, so this is more or less like the scope of variables in this case. Okay, is that clear? So this is a perfectly legal statement in C. Okay, if that's clear, then we'll be moving on to the next question. I think this is quite straightforward, this particular question.
Continues.
Yeah. So what we want to do is we have a variable I which goes from 0 till less than 20 with increments of 1, and our objective is to write something so that except I equal to 8, all the other values of I from 0 to 19 will be printed. Okay, now we know that if we want to skip one turn, so basically if we are skipping I equal to 8, that means we are skipping one iteration, right? We want to skip one printf iteration, one printf here in one of the iterations. So in that case, the best thing to skip some statements is continue, right? If you want to skip some statements, go to the next iteration, ignore one of the iterations, then the best thing that you could use is continue. So here I write that if I becomes 8, then just continue. That means go to the next iteration straight away. Don't do any other operations. That is what is the best fitting here. And if you write continue here, it will just skip I equal to 8. So I equal to 8 will not be printed. It will just go to the next iteration, and I would have become 9 by then, because at the end of the iteration the value of I is incremented, so it becomes 9. And so in the next iteration it goes on and normally prints I equals 9, but I equal to 8 will not be printed. Okay, I think this was quite an easy one. So we'll go to the next one. Alright, so we have the next question, which is we have int k and j. So short is a kind of int with a smaller range than the normal int. Yeah, and we do a while condition with a logical OR operation. We check that if k is less than equal to 4 or j is less than equal to 3, then do some operations. Okay, and after the loop is over, it prints the value of k and j. So what should be the output here? So what happens here? K
7 4.
Yes, so the answer is 7 and 4. 7 comma 4. Yeah.
Loop runs 3 times.
Yes, the loop will run 3 times. So in the first iteration you have it will check. So first, if you remember, the conditional is checked. So the conditional checked turns out to be true, because the first condition is true, the second condition is true, so the output will be true from a logical OR statement. Okay, and it will execute the statement, and k value becomes 1 plus 2, that is 3. J value becomes just gets incremented by 1, that means it will become 2, right? And goes for the second iteration. It checks the condition. The first condition, k less than equal to 4, is true, and the second condition, j less than equal to 3, is true. So it still leads to true. Loop will continue executing. The k value is 2 is added to the k value, so k becomes 5, and j becomes 3, right? It will go back, it will check in the third iteration. So it will check the first condition, k less than equal to 4, it is false, because k has become 5 now. And the second condition is j less than equal to 3, which is true. So a logical OR, if you remember, if either one of its inputs is true, then it will give a true. If only both are false, it will give a false. So this will be still true. The loop will continue executing. You have the k value, which will increment by 2 again, it will become 7, and the j value, which is 3, will increment by 1, and it will become 4. Then before the fourth iteration occurs, we go and check the conditional again, and we see that the first conditional, k is less than equal to 4, not satisfied, it's false. It's false. And the OR operation, then the second conditional is j less than equal to 3, which is also false, because j has become 4 now, and this becomes false. So the loop stops executing, right? And once the loop stops executing, it goes and it prints, it goes to the next statement, which is printing the values of k and j, and the value of k and j are 7 and 4. That is what gets printed. So I think someone asked some question regarding the increment. So we did not use any increment operator to increase the value of k and j, but we did the increment operation, right? Because we just wrote the expressions directly. So instead of writing k plus equal to 2 or k or j plus plus, I wrote k is equal to k plus 2 and j is equal to j plus 1. So this is the same thing, at least in this context is the same thing. Okay, so the increment does occur inside the loop. Okay, so I hope everyone understands why 7, 4 is printed as the output from this code. Alright, let's proceed to the next question. So
is it 10, sir? Answer?
Yeah, let us calculate and check what the answer should be. Okay, so here we have a variable I and a variable j. The j is the iterator. It is initialized to 0. The conditional is j is less than equal to 10, and the increment occurs as j plus equal to I. That means j gets added, I gets added to j in after every iteration. Okay, so let me write it down. I is equal to 1 and j is equal to 0. We start the first iteration because j less than equal to 10 is true, so we start the first iteration, and the step is I is equal to I plus j, which is 1 plus 0, that is 1. At the end of the iteration, j is equal to j plus I, so 0 plus I, which is 1, that means j becomes 1. Now in the second iteration is executed because the conditional is still true, because j is less than equal to 10. Yes, so then the statement is executed. I is equal to I plus j, which is 1 plus 1, that is 2, and at the end of the iteration the j value is incremented by I, that is it becomes 3. Right, now we go to the third iteration, and the condition is still true, so we continue with the iteration, and I value becomes I plus j, which is 2 plus 3, that is 5, and at the end of the iteration the j value is incremented by I, that is 3 plus 5, which becomes 8. Now in the fourth iteration, what happens, j is still less than equal to 10, so the conditional is still true, and the statement is executed. I is equal to I plus j, which is 5 plus 8, I becomes 13, right, and then at the end of the iteration the j value is incremented by I, so j was 8, and you add it up with 13, it becomes 21. Okay, and then before the fifth iteration occurs, the condition is checked, j less than equal to 10, but j is 21 now, so this is false, so it becomes false, loop stops, it doesn't execute a fifth iteration. Okay, so what is the value of I at the end of the execution of the program? I value is 13, so 13 is the answer. Okay,
There is no print statement now, sir.
there is no
Will be printed, sir. I or this.
no, there is no print statement. The question is asking what will be the value of I after the execution of the program. It's not asking what is the output, but yeah, it's asking that what is the value of I. So I can see that here. Okay, just a moment. All right, so that is why the value of 13 is it's not printed, but 13 is the answer. That is the value of I at the end of the execution of the program. So the last value that we gave to I was 13, so yeah, that is the value. Okay, I think this is clear. Let's go and look at the next question. So here we have if conditionals. It's more related to the if condition, and this is the second question is more related to the switch case. So this is kind of revisiting the previous week's tutorial. So here in the if statement, what happens when you compare 0? This means false
Condition is false.
to true. Okay, this entire thing is within a parenthesis, so this will be executed first. So false logical and true will give a false, right? What happens to the second one? We have 1 which is true, minus 1 which is also true. So true and true, sorry, 2 and true will give you a true. Okay, so these two are in parenthesis, so they will be executed first because parenthesis has the highest priorities. Now after this is executed, you get from the first section, from the first conditional you get false, and the second conditional you get true, and you do a logical OR operation among them, you get it true. So because this condition is true, whatever is within the if block gets executed, so this statement will be executed and you get condition is true. That's the answer. Is that clear? Okay, so let's move on to the next question. So here we have a switch statement inside which we are using a print statement. So in the previous tutorial session we saw that the return value of a printf statement is the number of characters it prints. So basically we are saying we are searching for a value of 3. So this printf in the format string IIT will be, the return value will be 3. Okay, because 3 characters are being printed. So switch of 3, it will go to the third, it will go to the case 3, it will printf Madras, but it has already printed IIT because it prints IIT and gives a return value of the number of characters it has printed. So it prints IIT and then switch of 3 and it goes to case 3, it prints printf Madras. So here option D will be the answer. So IIT Madras. Okay, so if anyone is having any issues regarding this, why it should be 3, you can just go back to the previous week's lecture and you can look at the questions that we have solved regarding this. So we discussed in detail why and how this printf statement returns the values, what exactly is the return value and what exactly it does. We have discussed it in some detail in the previous tutorial session. You can just go back and watch that. Okay, alright, so that was that question, and there is another question that I have for you. So just look at this particular program and the user input that is given is 7, so basically n equal to 7, and then we execute this do while loop. So what exactly does this program do? So for this kind of questions, it's just easy to solve the entire thing. Just take the user value, solve the entire thing and get whatever it is. So so we have a do while loop with the iterator I that starts from 2. So this is the initialization that has been done. The I value is 2 and the do in the first iteration. So what happens in the first iteration? So in do while loop, the first iteration is always executed. So you go, we check is n percentage I equal to 0. So n percentage 2, what will be the answer? It is actually 1. It is not, it is equal to 0, that is false, right? It's not equal to 0, that is 1, and 7 percentage 2 will give you a remainder of 1. So it's not 0, the remainder is not 0, so it's false. So whatever is inside the if condition will not be executed. So after that I plus plus, so I becomes 3, right? Now after that we check the conditional. So 3 less than 7, I less than n, 3 less than 7, true. Yeah, it's true. So we still continue to the second iteration. Now in the second iteration we check n percentage I again. So 7 percentage 3, is it 0? No, it is not 0, because we still have a remainder of 1. This will still give a remainder of 1, so it's not 0, so it's false. So printf the number is odd is still not executed, and I plus plus happens, so the I value becomes 4 now. Okay, and we check the condition is 4 less than 7. That is true. Yes, 4 is less than 7. So we go for the third iteration, and in the third iteration we check 7 percentage 4 is equal to 0. Still false. You have 3 as the remainder, so this will give you a remainder of 3, so it's still non-zero. And whatever the if condition statements will not be executed, and I value becomes 5, right? I plus plus I becomes 5. We check the condition, 5 less than 7, still true, right? Alright, so we go for the fourth iteration. In the fourth iteration it checks 7 percentage 5 equals 0. That is still false, because this has value of 2, it gives a remainder of 2, so it is still false. Then I value becomes 6. We check the condition, 6 less than 7, true. It goes for the fifth iteration. In the fifth iteration it checks 7 percentage 6 equals 0, still false, because this will give you 1, and I value becomes 7, and we check the loop, check the condition, 7 less than 7, this is false, so in that case the loop will stop. Now once the loop stops, it goes to the next statement. The next statement is printing the number is prime, and that is what is printed, so the answer is option B. Okay, so I think that is more or less clear to everyone. So we go to the next question. So the next question is basically a coding problem. So before looking at the solution, I would ask you to just kind of try to find out the algorithm by yourself. For example, you have a 3-digit integer, and you have to check if it's an Armstrong number. So what is an Armstrong number? An Armstrong number is a number where the sum of the digits of the number raised to the power of the total number of digits is equal to the number. So basically, if let me think about an Armstrong number. Let me take an example. Let's take this example, 371. Okay, so the number of digits is 3, so it is 371 is an Armstrong number, because if you do this 7 cube plus 1 cube, you will get the value 371. Okay, so that is why 371 is an Armstrong number. Okay, so in this case, what do we need to do? We need to isolate each of the digits, and we need to find out the number of digits, and we need to multiply this or use a power function and do it for example here cube, because I have specified as 3-digit integer, so you just need to multiply it 3 times or use a power function with a cube. Okay, so here what should we do first? We need to isolate each of the values. So I'll define some sum which is 0.0 initially. Then I will start a while loop. I'll save this, say this is n. So say I have entered the integer which is n. I will have another integer m, take the value of n, which is going to be a temporary variable. I will check until m is greater than 0. I will go and extract the last digit when you divide it by 10. So the remainder will always be the last digit of the number. So if I have 371 percentage 10 will give you 1. Now so so I've got the last digit of the number. I'll add it to the sum, so I do x into x into x, that is thrice, because I know it's a 3-digit number, so I can multiply it thrice. But if you didn't know, if you asked for any number, so you have to count the number of digits first, which has to be done in the similar way. So you add it to sum, and then I convert. So I do m is equal to m minus x by 10. So if it is 371, I do minus 1, 370 divided by 10, 37, right? And that is my loop. Then I check that if sum is equal to n, then it will be an Armstrong number, right? So let me try solving this with 371. So in the first iteration, what happens? So x becomes 1, sum becomes 1, and m becomes 37, right? And but it's still greater than 0, so we go to the second iteration. In the second iteration, x becomes 7, sum becomes 1 plus 7 cubed, right? And n becomes 37 minus 7, which is 30, by 10, which is 3, still greater than 0. We go to the third iteration, okay, and in the third iteration we get 3% 10, which is the remainder itself, which is 3. We have sum is equal to 1 plus 7 cube plus 3 cube, okay, and m becomes 3 minus 3 by 10, which is 0. So m is no more greater than 0. That is where the loop will stop, and it goes to the next statement and checks if sum is equal to n. So once it finds that this is actually equal to n, so we get to know that it's Armstrong number. Okay, so that is how you would kind of solve this question. Is that kind of clear to everyone? Okay, I'm expecting that it's clear. If it's not, then you can just ask me in the next class. So that is all the questions I had for you in this particular session. If you have any doubts, you can clarify them with me right now, or you can go through this and maybe come back in the next session and ask your doubts. So that is all for today. Okay, so if you don't have any doubts, I'll be closing the session here, and I have given the link to the previous session's video in the chat box. You can go to that and just follow that channel, and you can, all the lectures will anyway be uploaded there. Otherwise, you can go to the NPTEL course, the course page, and there you will find a problem solving session. In the problem solving session, you will find the different links provided to you for the videos. There will be one link provided to a Google Sheet. In that Google Sheet, you will get all the links to the PDFs as well as the recordings. Okay, so yeah, so that is everything for this class. Thank you for joining. Session link, what? Okay, should I send it again? Yeah, I can send that again. So that is the link I sent. That is for the previous lectures recording, like the previous tutorial sessions recording. So the recordings, all the recordings will be uploaded to that particular channel, which that recording has been uploaded from. Yeah, and you can just go and see that channel for the subsequent recordings. Okay. All right. So thank you for joining the session. We will meet next Tuesday at the same time, 7 to 9 p.m. Thank you.